You're listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast. Hey there, and welcome to the CD Baby DIY Musicians Podcast. My name is Kevin, and it's great to be back after the little break we took for the holidays. I hope all of you had a chance to take some time off and relax and maybe write and record some new music. Well, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, I'm sure you've noticed that even as an indie artist, there are still a number of music industry professionals that you will end up dealing with in some capacity. Whether it's the club booker or the music writer at the local or national paper, it's really a good idea to meet these people to gain a better understanding of what they do and how best to approach them with your music. Today we're going to add artist management to the list, as even in a time when you can do most everything yourself, it sometimes becomes impossible to keep the machine going without the help of someone else. It's a common complaint I hear from artists these days that they no longer spend time writing, recording, and creating because they spend so much time booking shows, soliciting press, and just taking care of business stuff. That's where an artist manager can step in and help ease the burden and return your main focus back to creating great music. Today you'll be hearing from Tom Simonson, an artist manager here in Portland, Oregon. Tom's management credits include Fastball, Mathew, and he's been the manager for David Wilcox for 18 years. If you're not familiar with David Wilcox, you could easily classify him as a singer-songwriter. He's been writing songs and recording records for quite a while. And with Tom's help, David has built a long, consistent career with diehard fans by playing music that stands the test of time. The great thing about having a manager like Tom on the show is that he really understands the indie perspective and how it's completely possible to maintain a successful career without the giant promotion dollars of the major labels. So let's get to that interview. Tom, well, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Why don't you start with how you got into artist management?
I got into artist management sort of through a number of different ways, really, but I was fortunate enough to, first off, I started playing in bands, something that I still do to this day, but that was really what got me going in the music business. But I was fortunate enough to start working for CBS Records while I was in college in Atlanta, Georgia. And that got me exposed to the record label side of the world, and just sort of followed that for a while. But it was pretty quick after starting to work for the label that I realized that management was what I wanted to do. But I sort of saw my time on the label side of things as being management school, basically. And so I sort of rode that for as long as it would go and as long as I could take it. You know, the record label world at that time was not that corporate, but it was corporate enough that I knew that it wasn't for me. And it's more corporate now. And this was up till I worked for CBS, actually become Sony Music by then, but I worked there until 1990. And I was very fortunate because the job that I was doing was about as good a management school as you could have, at least on the label side of things. I'd worked with all kinds of different, all of the different departments of 3 different labels. So, you know, the next year after I left that world, I was able to sit on the other side of the desk from people and really, you know, as a manager at that point, and really understand what it was that their job was. And that had a lot of benefits to me. If somebody was feeding me a line of BS, I knew it was BS because I had either done their job or, you know, knew it firsthand on a firsthand basis enough. But on the positive side of things too, I knew how, because of that experience, I knew how to craft my efforts for the greatest chance of success. You know, there were a lot of people, a lot of managers that I dealt with that wasted a lot of goodwill and political capital fighting the wrong battles. And they didn't necessarily know they weren't fighting the right battle. Record labels' bad reputation as it comes to dealing with artists is deserved, but it doesn't start that way. You don't sign a band with the idea that you're going to like screw them over, basically. I mean, it's not that sort of miserable and evil. I mean, it gets to that point in many instances, unfortunately, but it doesn't generally start there. And the difficult thing was to see, when I was at the label, to see sort of managers that were sort of helping that process along, helping that process of people at the label sort of turning off to that act.
Yeah. So what exactly is the manager's role as representing the artist? Some artists may never have worked with a manager, so they may not be sure what a manager does.
Well, it's evolved a lot. I won't spend a lot of time on the past, but the world I've just been speaking about was, sort of pre-internet being anything like we know it now. And at a time when the label was a much more crucial link. Not that there weren't people making their way independently back then also, but it was much, much harder. You didn't have the tools that we have now. It was much less viable to sort of go it on your own back then. So in that time, the manager and working with major label acts or working to get an act to become a major label act was a slightly different set of duties and job descriptions. Not entirely different, but... So to answer your question, I guess I'll focus on the here and now. The simplest answer is I'm the guy that's there to make it so the artist doesn't have to think about any of the business stuff, that they can put their energy onto writing great songs and touring and recording and having the confidence that the business is being handled. Different artists and managers work in different ways as far as how involved the artist is on a day-to-day basis. Some artists want to be really involved in like the minutia of everything, and others are, content to not know. They would prefer not to know. So it's crucial that it's a really good working relationship and that the communication that exists is very, very strong. It's sort of an old cliche, but the adage about artists and management relationship being sort of like a marriage is kind of true. There are elements of you need to have that kind of confidence and that kind of trust. So I guess that's sort of the part where that adage comes about. But in the current day and age, the management artist relationship is kind of changing. Managers are in many instances sort of being responsible for being the label. They're running the business. They're running, they may be they may be much more the booking agent than they used to be as well. So there are all of these different facets that when I was first starting out as a manager and working with major label acts, I was much more sort of trying to keep track of other people who were doing all of these jobs at the record label, the publicity department and the promotion department and the marketing and the sales and A&R, all of those things. Now, being that David Wilcox, my client, is on a record label, but it's kind of a hybrid indie label where he makes the records and delivers them, and it's kind of a licensing deal situation. I'm doing so much more of those things that I used to sort of go to the record label and call somebody and say, hey, has A, B, and C been done? Now I don't, but I really should have like a mirror on my desk so I can yell at me. Those times when, I used to be able to pick up the phone and yell at somebody else, but now it's kind of me, like if this stuff isn't getting done, I got nobody to blame.
You mentioned that there's some artists that are really involved and want to know every little detail, and some that are just like hands off and say, we trust you. Is there a balance that you like, or a type of artist that you prefer to work with? Somebody who's either involved or just gives you that trust, or what's your working style?
I'm content with wherever the artist feels it needs to be, because ultimately they need to be confident and comfortable. With that said, I have worked with artists that, in my opinion, were too focused on the minutia, to their detriment, basically, that they were losing sleep over things that weren't important, but like stuff that was kind of out of their hands and beyond what they could beyond what they could really sort of impact. And so at that point, it was sort of detrimental, basically, you know? So I guess to answer your question, I would say I really sort of take my cues on that from the artist's comfort level. And it evolves too, you know? David and I have been working together since 1993. So, you know, there's a whole lot of stuff that when we first started working together that I would spend, you know, sort of talking with him. Something would come up. I'd call and say, hey, we have this option and this option. What do you think? You know, you want A or do you want B? At this point, I know he wants B. So I don't even need to make that call, but that's born out of almost 15 years of working together. So that relationship evolves over time as well.
So basically, in the past, your role would have been kind of the representative to the artist, to go to the label, to go to the booking agent, and just make sure that they have the artist's interest in mind, or you're just representing the artist's interest in those cases, but now you're doing a lot of those roles yourself.
Yeah, much more so. I mean, there is still a booking agent in the mix. There is still a record label in the mix, and again, with David's label, there are people doing radio promotion, and they're doing retail and stuff. So it's not like I'm literally doing everything, but it's very different than it used to be. And in the past, you know, I'd be involved in crafting the marketing plan, but not as much. I mean, it would be more like the product manager would put it together and then they would send it to me and we'd talk about it. Now, you know, I just had an hour and a half long conference call yesterday with guys at the label, like really sort of going through and creating it as opposed to just sort of reacting to it, you know? So I guess that would be the best way to describe that. In the past, I was always involved, but sort of a step or two back. And now I'm much more hands-on on the creation of the plans and much more hands-on in the implementation of them as well.
One of the questions I had was, what are some of the things that would fall outside the scope of you as a manager that wouldn't fall on your plate as working with David or any other artist?
You mean like marital troubles?
No, like...
Because I do try to stay out of those as best I can, but...
Well, like, you know, I guess it sounds like some of the lines have probably been great as things have changed, but like, do you ever take it upon yourself to contact press directly, or do you always channel that through a publicist?
No, there is a publicist in the mix, but where I have relationships, absolutely. I mean, I'm making those calls, and I'm also working very closely with the publicist to sort of, you know, he's good and he knows a lot, but he also doesn't know. And he actually worked with David many years ago too. He worked with David before I did, so his history with David goes way back also. But there were many years sort of in between that he wasn't involved. So I sort of get involved, you know, saying, hey, the writer in this town at that paper, you know, has been really supportive over the years. We should definitely make sure we're getting with him. And this person has reviewed him favorably in the past, and we should make sure that, you know, so there are those kinds of things, as well as actually me making the call, where, again, if it's somebody that I've got a relationship with, I'm a bit of a control freak by design, by what I do, but not so much so. I mean, I'm always whoever has the best shot with anything. Doesn't have to be me. Yeah. You know, I'm always most focused on who has the best, you know, the best relationship, the best chance of getting something done. It doesn't need to have my name on it, you know.
Is there a standard management contract that, like, if a indie band starts getting to that level where they start talking to managers, that they should kind of know that this is pretty much standard, the way things work, like a percentage the manager takes? Or... Sure,
yeah. There are some exceptions, I guess, in Nashville, but for the most part, a management deal should be at the most 20%, 15 to 20%. I mean, it's typically 10% for a booking agent, perhaps 15 for a band that's just starting out. You know, just the harsh reality of that dynamic is, from the agent's standpoint, they deserve more when the guarantees are low, because it's a lot of work. And, you know, if you're getting $100 gigs, $10 doesn't really pay for for keeping the lights on, much less paying the phone bill and the postage bill. So, you know, if an agent sort of comes and says, hey, I want 15, or even conceivably 20, so long as the deal is crafted intelligently, that it's 20% of gigs below a certain level of money, and then above it, it could be it could have gradations to the deal. So I wouldn't say there's, a rock solid, hard and fast. And the other piece is if it's a good agent and if it's somebody that's going to be working hard for you, and getting you gigs that you wouldn't have otherwise, hey, 80% of something is way better than 100% of nothing, at that level. And in terms of building a career.
Does a management contract typically have a set amount of time, like 2 years or 1 year? Or?
Yeah, typically. For me, I always sort of went into a deal setting up, hey, these are the terms, and this is the time frame, and then also having basically a starting time frame where it was very clearly defined that, like, if it wasn't working, that this is the period, it's 6 months or, whatever the agreed upon sort of initial period was. Here's what I'm going to get paid for that time. Maybe nothing if you didn't make any money. Or, here's the expenses. If I incur any expenses on your behalf, I'm going to get paid back, those sorts of things, just so I'm not going in the hole for the process. But having sort of an introductory period, if you will, just to make sure it's the right situation. For me, it's always been really important to feel like it's the right sort of vibe. It just makes sense over the long haul. And life's too short to not be like working with people that you want to work with in both directions. That's not just protecting me, that's protecting the artist. So
that being the case, how do you go about finding artists that you're going to manage? I mean, has it always been a few that you just happen to already have some sort of working relationship with them, whether when you're working at the label, or how do you come across those relationships?
It's come through all sorts of different means, but friends of mine at labels that are still at labels have referred folks to me. Friends of mine that are attorneys, just sort of the referral thing is kind of the main piece. I have had a few bands that I saw and got exposed to, and went up and talked to them and started working with them in that way. But lately, I have not really been working with any developmental acts on the management side of things as a straight management deal. I've been doing much more sort of management consulting, just given where the business has evolved, and given the fact that as I've aged and as time has passed, I've become, I think, less of a gambler, which is basically what you're doing as a manager, signing a developmental act. It's a really speculative endeavor, and I've worked with some bands where, if I had put that same amount of time pumping gas, I would have made a lot more money, So it's not that I'm independently wealthy and just sort of resting on big fat checks that come in.
But you like to eat.
Wouldn't that it were so? But I just sort of value, my time, and I look at like, well, what's a better way to do this? And the consulting thing has actually proven to be a good way for me to sort of work with people and help them out. But without signing a full-on management deal, basically. So
what would be your working relationship with an artist in like a consulting situation?
Well, it varies. I mean, with some of them, it's an ongoing relationship where I work with them basically on an hourly fee structure. So like you would pay an attorney or an accountant or somebody like that. That's kind of how I do it. And sometimes it's sort of a once and done conversation. Sometimes it's, once a quarter. And then again, with some other folks, it's a more sort of ongoing relationship that I'm kind of there to help them do the best that they can, make the right moves and make the right choices and decisions to build their career. There's so many more opportunities available to artists now. And managers. I also work with some developing managers, if you will, or new managers. Yeah. The whole thing is, it's not rocket science, but it's helpful to know, the people that I end up working with are kind of generally really, really sharp. And I spend a lot of time sort of, telling them that they're doing the right thing, which, on one hand, you might think, well, geez, that sounds like they're getting ripped off. But on the other hand, if you don't know that you're doing the right thing, you spend a lot of time kind of spinning your wheels or wondering or thinking, and, there's more to it than that. I do tend to help, sort of tweak. They're on the right path or they're doing the right thing, but I'm able to sort of help them take that good thing that they're doing and make it better, or twist it, bend it just a little and focus it a little better. But, that has been, it's certainly been good for me, but I do also feel that it's been good for the people that I've been working with as well, because it has helped them really expand and maximize their efforts, and that the time and energy that they're spending is being really well focused.
In your opinion, when is the right time for an artist to start looking for a full-time manager? I mean, what point in their career do you think now it's the right time, as opposed to, you mentioned like when you first started out, your manager was basically your link to the record companies and things that you couldn't do on your own. But now that those things of distribution and some of those things are available to indie artists, when should they bring a manager into the mix?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you've sort of touched on, in a lot of ways, probably sooner now than before, almost. You can point to examples in both directions that sort of defy what I just said. But speaking in generalities, everybody at basically all the levels of the business now, everybody is sort of looking for the artist to prove themselves more than they used to. The speculative sort of taking on just someone with raw talent who's nowhere, sort of in the food chain, that is, nowhere, not like already building a following, is happening less and less and less than it ever has. Everybody's, the analogy I've used is the way the business used to work is, if you imagine like baseball as the metaphor, and pro scouts go into like a little league baseball game and saying, well, that kid looks like he might be a really good pitcher someday. I think we should sign him. We're going to stick with him, develop him, and hopefully have a real pitcher out of him 12 years from now. Yeah. And in a way, that was kind of what was happening, more so. There were bands getting signed, with the idea of like, these guys have no following, but man, this guy, this front man is great, and great songs, and the rest of the band is good, and we've got something here. We can build something around this. And now the model is much more, well, let's go to some college games and see who's the good pitcher at the college level, or who's already playing, minor league ball. That's much more of, you have got to get yourself to that point much more. I mean, that, again, there's exceptions to this in both directions, but in general, that analogy bears out to where the business has evolved to. Mm-hmm. So it's really the artist's job to build themselves. And the cool thing about, if the artist does build themselves to a point where people are interested, the best bit now is you really can write your own ticket. Chances are, if you've built yourself to the point that people are interested, you probably don't need them. Yeah. And, you can make a lot more money selling many fewer records. Unless your world is like just total sort of pop, radio single driven hit song sort of a thing for like a sort of younger demographic, think long and hard about, like, do you even want to sign a record deal with a major label? Yeah. That model is really not really necessary unless you are in that very narrow sort of world of like just the most sort of saccharine one-hit wonder kind of pop thing, basically. Because outside of that, you can probably build a much better career. You may sell fewer albums, but you'll have a career. I mean, the rock bands, the sort of non-pop radio bands that the labels, the majors are succeeding at, quote unquote, developing, many of them are not going to have careers. Mm-hmm. And if they had kept doing what they were doing and building the way they were building, and they wouldn't have sold 500,000 records, but you know what? They would have sold 50,000 records, and they would have made money selling 50,000 records as opposed to selling 500,000 and being $250,000 unrecouped to the label.
That most of the artists listening to our podcast would identify more with an artist like David Wilcox and some of the things that he does. And he's been doing it for years and years and years professionally. What are some of the things that he does that you see that have helped that long-term success? It seems like it's slow and steady.
Yeah, I think the first and foremost thing is not as much a thing as it is an attitude or a starting point for him. For him, his whole idea was about sort of building a long-lasting, sustainable career and doing it in a way that was sustainable. Having a life worth singing about is the way he has described it. And there have been some decisions that he has made, we have made collectively, and some that he made prior to me being involved, that were not necessarily chasing everything that he could get at the time, but that have allowed him to sort of continue over the long haul. And touring is really one of the most crucial things that I would sort of point to in terms of building a following, building a career, and building a base of people that want to interact with you as an artist and that will continue to support you. You know, again, the example I was using before about the major label bands is, you know, they might sell 500,000 records or 1 million or whatever, but it may not be based on sort of real fans. You know, they may have been fans of that song or of that sort of particular moment for that band, but they're not necessarily, again, there's exceptions, but in general, that model does not create the diehard long-term fan. And if you go into it with the idea that it is going to be a long road and it's going to be a difficult one, but hopefully you enjoy the process. You know, I don't have any illusions that it's easy, and I'm sure there's people that will be listening to this going, "Yeah, that's easy for you to say, pal." I know how difficult it is, but at the same time, hopefully the underlying sort of love for the process is there. It doesn't mean you have to love when it's miserable, but that the motivation and the drive comes from sort of continuing to do it, because it's, you know, you can always sort of look to the next level and think, man, it's going to be so much easier when ... happens, you know, and you can do it as an indie act too. You know, it's not just like when I get that major label deal. I mean, that used to be the sort of thing that like everybody thought was going to be the answer. And unfortunately, that wasn't the answer then. It's not the answer now. And at every step along the way, you know, there are things that hopefully will happen that will simplify and make the job less difficult than it was before in certain ways, and bring up some other things. You know, they're like, man, if we could only get a booking agent. Okay, well, cool, you got a booking agent, but now you got to tour all the time, because that's what it's going to take to kind of have you keep that booking agent, basically, for him to make his money or her money. You know, you got to be out working. And you might think, great, that's great. We want to tour. We want to work. And, you know, at a certain point, you may say, man, I'd really like to be at home. You know, I'm sick of this. Like, how many more nights do I have to sleep in the back of the van next to, you know, Joe, the bass player that snores, you know, and drools? At every step of the way, you know, it sort of makes things better, but then probably brings in, you know, another whole realm of difficulties. And that continues basically until you're U2. I think for them, probably, you know, they may have gotten past the point where those things continue to beset them. But who knows? You talk to them, they might sing a different story.
They may want to go home too.
Yeah, absolutely. You never know.
Well, do you have any just advice for indie artists out there who are out there trying to get it going? You obviously mentioned touring. Is there any? I know David Wilcox has had. I've heard about his shows, and you know, I mentioned a friend of mine was a real big fan, and if David Wilcox was in town, he had to be there. What is he doing at his shows? Because everyone talks about touring, right, but I think a lot of bands just go out there and say, we're playing shows, nothing's happening, but there's a little more than just that.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things. One is there's all the different stuff that we can talk about, that we are talking about, that other folks have talked about on the podcast, and that you read about, and all those things. But the one piece that's vital in the whole mix, and I don't mean this as glib as it's going to sound, but you got to be good. You really have got to stand out. There's so many people out there. There's so many bands. What is it that you're offering to the people that are listening, that you want to listen to you? You're playing. And again, I don't have any illusions about how difficult it is. It's hard just to get that gig. And on a certain level, you think, man, I did all this work. I got this gig. I got us here. The van broke down, all those things. And that's real. And yes, those were big challenges, and nobody in the audience really cares or knows about any of that. They're just sitting there looking up at you thinking okay, well, here I am. Here's this band. Never heard them before. I hope they're good. Yeah. What are they gonna do for me, kind of a thing? What are they gonna do for me musically? What reason are you going to give them, that person in the crowd, to remember your name, to sign up on your email list, to go visit your website or your MySpace page and download your songs and buy your disc through CD Baby or whatever? It's that's your job as the artist. And again, I don't have any illusions that all the rest of those just administrative details are not crushing enough just by themselves. They are, but you have to be really good. And that doesn't mean that you have to be a virtuoso at your instrument. We all know plenty of examples in both directions of great players that who cares, or crappy players that you would watch, you go hear them, sing the the phone book rather, if it was the right person with the right thing, you're there. So, and there's no real way to sort of, for me or anybody else, to say how to get that, but you need to, as the artist, you need to think about what it is that the deal that you are going to strike with your listener, and what it is and how it is that you want to interact with them. I touched on a few things about how to try to make the most of the touring. Every time that you play somewhere, hopefully you're leaving behind more fans, and fans that will help you build more fans. There's the sort of romantic notion of let's get in the van and book our tour from Los Angeles to Boston and back. And that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. But not if you can't get back to Boston again for another 10 months. The point is to try to sort of work in concentric circles out from wherever you are and hit places again and again and again as often as you can, without sort of overplaying. And, I can't give you an exact, hey, it's 7 weeks. 7 weeks is the perfect amount of time to go back. Whatever. It may be or may not be. It would sort of vary some on the club and the type of band and, who you're trying to reach. But find the time frame and get back there and try like crazy to capture the people that you have played for there. Get them on your email list, develop a relationship with them. Those are the crucial things to build a following.
Well, I think that's great advice to end on.
Excellent.
Are you currently looking for any other artists? Or are you just working with David right now?
Just working with David right now as a full management client, but I am definitely still working with people on the management consulting basis.
Is there a way people who are interested in that service can contact you?
Absolutely. It's at simonsonmanagement.com, SIMONSON, and management all spelled out.com. It's a very simple, no-frills website, and the whole thing is very low-key. There's a lot of people that are sort of preying on people's hopes and dreams and aspirations in the music business.
Yes, we know.
And I have absolutely no interest in being one of those people. So it's very, very... it's a simple thing. I talk with folks for free up front just to make sure it's a fit and that I feel like I can give them something of value for their money and for them to feel like they can get something of value for their money. And if it feels like a good thing where we're both interested in pursuing, then we move on from there.
Well, cool. We'll put a link to your website on
Excellent.
Our website. And thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
that's going to bring us to the end of another episode. If you think you're at a point where talking to someone like Tom could give you and your music a boost, feel free to send him an email, like he said. We'll also put a link to his website from the podcast website, which is cdbabypodcast.com. So if you go look at the show notes for this episode, there'll be a link there that will take you right to his site. One other item I wanted to mention before we go is that we started this podcast to be a resource for artists, but several people have asked us about the possibility of starting a music podcast for CD Baby. In that podcast being a podcast where the format would just be playing music by indie artists. There'd be no interviews or talking, it would just be music. If that's something that you would be interested in us producing, please send us an email and let us know. You can email us at info@cdbabypodcast.com. It's important that you do so because your response will partly dictate if it's something that we get going in the near future. So we'd like to get your feedback on that. And if there's anything else you'd like to email us about, you can use that same email address, info@cdbabypodcast.com. And speaking of music, I'm going to close out today's episode with a track by Shannon Hurley. This song is called Matter of Time, and it's off her album, Ready to Wake Up.
just a matter of time, just a matter of time before you open your eyes. Just a matter of finding the way to your heart. It's just a matter of time. I just want to show you I've got so much love inside of me. I love these dreams that I keep buried deep inside the heart
listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast, broadcasting from Portland, Oregon, USA.